الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وآله الأطهار وأصحابه الأبرار. This verse here, which is in Surah Al-Kahf, it's the 19th verse, when Allah says وَكَذَلِكَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ وَكَذَلِكَ بَعَثْنَاهُمْ لِيَتَسَاءَلُوا بَيْنَهُمْ قَالَ قَائِلٌ مِّنْهُمْ كَمْ لَبِثْتُمْ قَالُوا لَبِثْنَا يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمٍ. So we raised them up from their sleep that they might question each other. Said one of them, how long have we tarried? The other said, we have stayed a day or part of a day. And then they said, قَالُوا رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثْتُمْ فَبَعَثُوا أَحَدُكُمْ بِوَرَقِكُمْ هَذِهِ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ. So Allah knows best how long you have tarried. And then he said, send one of you with this waraq, which is money. Waraq means silver. And the dhahab, there's dhahab and fidda. And waraq is silver. So بِوَرَقِكُمْ هَذِهِ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَيُّهَا أَزْكَى طَعَامًا فَلْيَأْتِيكُمْ بِرِزْقٍ مِّنْهُ وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ وَلَا يَشْعُرَنَّ بِكُمْ أَحَدًا. So he says, so send you then with this money of yours to the town and let him find out or seek out. فَلْيَنْظُرْ means to look. And يَنْظُرْ نَظَرَ يَنْظُرُ نَظَرًا means to look, you know. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. And haven't they contemplated, haven't they looked seriously? So it has the idea of looking with concern, or look at which is the azka ta'aman, the purest food. فَلْيَأْتِيكُمْ بِرِزْقٍ مِّنْهُ. So let him bring some provision from that food. وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ. And he should behave with care and courtesy, or beware, go easy, in order not to inform the others about you. So the idea of فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَيُّهَا أَزْكَى طَعَامًا, let him look at which is the purest of food. And this is an issue that in some ways there's been a concern about food from the very early period of Islam. If you look at the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, al-Qushayri in his Risala says that they were more concerned about their food than they were about Qiyam al-Layl. That's in the Risala of Imam al-Qushayri. So why were they more concerned about their food? Because if they were eating food that was not good, there wouldn't be any Qiyam al-Layl. In other words, if you eat haram food, you won't be able to do Qiyam al-Layl. In fact, one of the reasons why we find it difficult to get up in the night has to do with wrong actions and things. One of the Salaf said, I heard something, as a result of it I was deprived of night prayers for 40 days. Because he heard some ghiba or something and didn't say anything about it. So the idea of having pure food, if you look in the Quran, every time the word halal is mentioned with food, tayyib is mentioned with it, which means pure. Now usually it has to do with ish'ar al-ni'mah, and also with the fact that it should be pure from its source, which is halal in a sense. So, and there's nothing redundant in the Quran. There's no reason to have an adjective with something if it's redundant in its meaning. So when Allah says halalan tayyiba, halal means halal and tayyib means tayyib. So if it's not tayyib in the sense of it not being from a proper monetary source, it's certainly not halal, right? You can't say it's halal if the money is haram, the food is haram, which you bought it with. But one of the things about the early period and until very recently is that the majority of food was pure by its nature. In other words, because there was not a sophisticated way of packaging food, preserving food, refrigeration, all of these type of things, by its nature there was limited things which people could do to food, because it went off. So they learned natural ways of preserving food, like pickling and doing these type of things, murabba, because they found early on that sugar was a very good preserver. But as we've increased in our understanding of chemistry and technology and these things, people now are able to do the most sophisticated things in manipulating food, literally changing the chemical structures of food. And there's a whole, what's called dietary science, is learning how to do that. Now, if you give the idea that Allah created everything and guided it to its purpose, that everything is created and guided to its purpose, right? Everything that Allah has made, it has a purpose and it will fulfill its purpose. But Allah, in several verses in the Quran, tells us to not change the creation of Allah. And He also tells us that Shaitan promises, وَلَا يُغَيِّرَنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, that he will get the humans to change the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to begin to change it at some fundamental level. Now in the Quran it talks about clipping the ears of the animals, because this is what they were doing. These are the things. Or in the Sunnah about splitting the teeth, what the women used to do to ornament their teeth, they would put tafleej, they would make gaps in the teeth because they thought it was beautiful. Now people close the gaps because they think gaps in the teeth are ugly, right? But the Arabs, they used to actually put things between the teeth of the women in order to split the teeth so that when they smiled they had these gaps in the teeth. Very interesting, why humans do this. Also, the idea of plucking the eyebrows. The Prophet ﷺ discouraged that unless a woman, the fuqaha say, unless a woman has excessive hair or something like that, but to pluck them until there's nothing but a small line or nothing left there, or even putting on fingernail polish. So if you look at really, or letting the nails grow, because it's against fitrah. Right? So if you look at all of these things, Islam generally is a deen that teaches us to leave things in their natural state, fitrah. That's part of what fitrah means, the original state. Fatir is the originator. Fatir is samawati wal ard. So fitrah has to do with natural state. There's a beautiful hadith in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ passed by a group of people that were doing ta'been, or they were talqiyah. What do you say? Not talqiyah, but yeah, ta'bir. How do you say that in? Like fertilizing? Ta'bir. Pollinating. What they were doing is they were doing this yu'abbir al-nakhil. So they would take the male pollen and put it onto the female tree. And the Prophet passed by and he thought something was very strange about that, because he wasn't from Medina, he was from Mecca. They didn't have palm trees in Mecca, so he'd never seen that before. But there was something that seemed unnatural about it, that the person would have to go from one to the other. Now, for me, what I find fascinating about that is the Prophet's natural reaction to it, that it seems something unnatural about it. Now, the Sahaba left doing it, the Ansar, and they had a bad crop that year. And they went and they complained to the Prophet, and he said, why did you listen to me? I wasn't, he said, Antum adra bi umuri dunyakum. You know better about your dunya. He just made a remark, and it wasn't wahi, and it was his own comment about what they were doing, that he thought it was strange. But the point is that I think this is an indication of how the Prophet ﷺ viewed the world, you see. That there's something that people are impacting too much on the world. There's something unnatural. Now there's a very interesting theory, if you just want to take this a step further. Beavers make dams in America. I don't know if they have beaver. It's an indigenous American animal, I think. But there's beavers that are animals. They make dams along rivers. And damming is obviously an ancient form for agriculture. But the idea of making these mega dams is a modern 20th century phenomenon. There's a theory that was some physicists in America came up with, what they actually thought that the atmospheric changes that were taking place were not a result of this global warming and the ozone layer loss. They actually said it was because of these mega dams that were being built all over the world, that they're acting like weights on the wheels, that they're upsetting at very, very fine levels the axis of the earth. and the balance of the rotation of the earth, because the water's not flowing at its natural levels, and you have these masses of water which are minute in relation to the earth itself, but just like those small bearings on the wheels are minute, it has a radical effect on the wheel itself. Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting theory, with this whole idea of when you begin to play with the creation of Allah without knowledge, without basira, then you end up doing much more damage than you do harm. And now they want to build this huge dam in the Yangtze River in China, right? And these are all IMF World Bank projects. I mean, there's nothing for the indigenous people in it, really. They're just giant projects to get these countries into massive debt on usury. So the whole basis of it is usurious. And so the effects are going to be bad just from that, but the ecological effects and the effects that it has on the place itself is also relevant. So if you look now, if you go down to a very fundamental level, basically what's happening is we are all resonances. We're literally electromagnetic resonances. That's what all of us are. At a very basic level, we're vibrating at a certain resonance. And food also has a resonance. And when you eat food, it either nourishes or it harms. Food is not neutral, right? It's either going to be beneficial or harmful. If you eat it in its right proportions, and if you eat good food, it's going to be beneficial to the body. If you eat it in its wrong proportions, or if it's bad food, it's going to be harmful to the body. And the worst thing that you could do is fill the body with food. شَرُّ وِعَاءٍ مَلَأَهُ إِبْنُ آدَمَ بَطَنَهُ. The worst vessel that the son of Adam can fill is his stomach. Subhanallah. That's a sahih hadith. The worst vessel that the son of Adam can fill is his stomach. And he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, تَكْفِي ibn Adam لُقَيْمَاتٍ يُقِمْنَ بِهَا ظَهْرُهُ. It's enough for the son of Adam to have just morsels that he keep his back upright with. لُقَيْمَات, that's tasghir of luqma. It's a diminutive of luqma, which is a bite. So small bites. It's enough for the son of Adam to have small bites that he can keep his back straight with. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, but if you have to eat more than that, and this is the one everybody thinks is sunnah. He was saying at the most extreme, then 1/3 for food, 1/3 for water, 1/3 for air. That's the extreme. If you can't do with just luqaymat, then just do it. Now people say, I'm making this up or what? People now, they always say the sunnah 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's true or not true? People forgot the first part of the hadith. And they think that that's the sunnah. That's not the sunnah. That's for excessive people. And always the people that mention these hadiths invariably eats much more than they need. And they kind of say, well, subhanallah, sunnah matruka. You know, nobody practices that sunnah anymore. It's not a sunnah in the first place. The sunnah is luqaymat. This is the rukhsa. وَإِن كَانَ لَا بُدَّ. If you have to do more than that, then just do ثُلُثٌ لِطَعَمِهِ وَشَرَابِهِ وَنَفَسِهِ. So the second is a rukhsa, it's a dispensation. The first is the sunnah. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ did not encourage asceticism. He did not like asceticism. He didn't like going to extremes. And food is one of the extremes. And this is why al-Busayri says, وَرُبَّ مَخْمَصَةٍ شَرٌ مِنَ التُّخَمِ. Maybe sometimes too little food is worse than too much food. You see, because the nature of the nafs, if you go to an extreme, generally the excessive extremes are safer than the deficient extremes. This is a very interesting phenomenon. If you look at diabetes, a diabetic will rarely be in serious trouble if their sugar goes way, way up. They get into trouble when it drops way, way down. You see, they get into trouble when there's not enough blood sugar. When it goes under like 50, 40, you go under 40 and you go into a glucose coma, right? And then, boom, there's no sugar to the brain and you can die. They go into coma and they'll die. Whereas it can go up 800, 1,000, right? If you know the normal range is like between 80 and 120, something like that, right, in the blood. If you go up past like 800, 1,000, you're going to have problems, right? And they'll be aware that something's happening. But the danger of dying is not imminent like it is if you go the other way, which is deficiency. And this is what happens. An overeater can overeat for a long, long time, but an undereater can go into serious problems in a very quick time. And what al-Busayri radiallahu anhu was saying there is that sometimes excessive zuhud is worse than people who are too much in the dunya. That going to an extreme of rejecting the dunya can be oftentimes more dangerous. Why? Because those people will oftentimes go to the opposite or kill themselves. And so the Prophet did not like asceticism, nor did he like this other extreme, because he's the man of the middle way, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why in the Sunnah you will very rarely see the Prophet ever pointing out to people faults. He did it very subtly, and it was not his character to expose people's faults. But there are a few hadiths that are very interesting, in that there was a man who had a large stomach, and he said to the man, had this been on somebody else, it would be better for you. Meaning the food that you're overeating, it's better if it was somebody who really needed it, right? Now we also know Umar in the Kitab al-Raqa'iq of Ibn al-Mubarak sees Yazid making tawaf, and his stomach was coming over his izar, and Umar took his darra, his stick, and he lifted his ihram, and he said, "Abatnu kuwaythar hada?" Is this the stomach of a little kafir? Because he's taking it from a hadith that says that the mu'min, and it's in the sahih, the mu'min eats, the kafir eats from 7 am'a. Al-kafiru ya'kuru min 7 am'a. The kafir eats from 7 intestines, and the mu'min only eats from 1. And this came because of a man. The asbab al-wurud is that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him about Islam, and they brought him milk, and he drank a whole bowl, and then he said, "You want more?" He said, "Yes." They brought him, he drank 7 bowls, and then he said, "I'm finished." So the next day he came back and he said Shahada, and the Prophet offered him milk. He drank 1 bowl. He said, "You want more?" He said, "No, I'm full." So the Prophet said, the mu'min drinks from 1 intestine, whereas the kafir, he drinks from 7. So the kafir's appetite for the dunya is much greater than the mu'min's. And food is our essential connection with the world. You see, the first connection with the world is the breath, and then the next is the food itself. So this is the essential connection with the world that we have, is food. And this is why if you don't conquer that level of the nafs, it's a big problem. The food nafs, it's a very serious problem. Now, it's not really fair for me to talk about this, because that's not where some people have different problems. And food, maybe because when I was about, I think, 21 or something, I got amoebic dysentery, and I lost my appetite after that. And I've never really got it back. And that's what the Chinese call spleen deficiency. You know, you get a deficiency in the spleen from dysentery, and that causes your appetite diminishes. So it's easy for me. I'm not zahid. A zahid is somebody that fights their nafs. You know, they have a difficult time and they withhold from food. For me, that's not the situation. Food has never been a serious, I'm not somebody that can eat a lot of food, and I can go a long period of time. But it's not because it's mujahada. It's just my nature. That's what they call shara'un wafaqahu hawa. Wafaq al-shara'. You know, it's when your own nafs is in accordance with the shara'. So there's not really a reward for it. It's just lucky you. Like I have a friend, he hates onions, and he is always quoting the hadith, the Prophet didn't eat onions. But he just doesn't like them. It's hawa wafaq as-sunnah. So his hawa goes according with, which is good, alhamdulillah. That's a good thing. But some people have a serious difficulty with food. Like it is a real difficulty. They eat a lot and they want more. And that takes mujahada. So you need to learn literally. And one of them said, of the Salaf, he said, I would prefer to stop before I'm satiated, قبل أن أشبع, that he would leave the food, that I would do qiyam al-layl. That it was harder on the nafs for him to stop the food than getting up at night and doing qiyam al-layl. So they had a very strong understanding of that, what mujahada is and what struggling against the self is. And if you look at Abu Madyan, radiallahu anhu, the great North African master of ihsan, his whole book is about juwa'. That he says this path is about juwa', that you have to jawwa' nafsik, you have to really make yourself hungry. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ, his sunnah was to fast on Mondays and Thursdays. And some of his Sahaba fasted every other day. The Siyamu Dawood, Siyamu Wisal he prohibited, which is a continuous Siyam, the fasting every day. He prohibited that, or what they call in the West, which is a medicinal fast, they call it a dry fast, where you literally don't eat food or drink. And we know it's in the confirmed sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ did it. And some of the shuyukh have done that. And Ibn Taymiyyah in his Fatawa actually has a talk about that and mentioned that he did do that. He performed that type of fast. But it's a very dangerous fast, and the Prophet prohibited it, because he said that Allah, Inna Rabbi yut'imuni wa yasqini, my Lord gives me food and gives me drink. You see, so he was having a spiritual nourishment. Now we know also Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu, in the Sahih, when he went to Mecca to find out about the Prophet, he stayed in the Kaaba for 1 month. And he used to drink only Zamzam. He wasn't eating any food or drinking anything else. And he said he gained weight in that month from the Zamzam water. You see, so that's a spiritual nourishment that happens. And there are people that, you know, I know one sheikh that he only drinks milk. That's all he lives on. And he's been doing that for several years. And he's robust. He's not thin at all. You know, so there's people that can do that. We can't do that. If I did that, I'd kill myself. And that's why it's haram to do that for somebody. So those things are related to people's stations and things like that. And so this idea of you know, food and its what it means and its essential qualities. The Prophet ﷺ, what I learned in Africa, and some of the people here who've been in Africa and lived with Africans, whether it's in Ghana or Nigeria, Sudan, food in Africa is fuel, right? Really, it's fuel. The Africans, the Saharan Africans, Sub-Saharan Africans are not big connoisseurs of food. They don't have cuisines. It's actually quite simple food when you move inside. I mean, in the cities, obviously, you're going to get a little different, but still, it's still very simple. When you go to places where there's high civilization, you get a massive amount of energy being put into food. If you go, for instance, to Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, people will spend the whole day cooking a meal, you know, so the whole life revolves around food. The Prophet did not like that at all. And he talked about the colored foods that his ummah would eat. And when some of the Sahaba got to Syria and found other Sahaba eating colored food, they were shocked, because they were used to very primitive food. They ate, if you look at the diet of the Prophet ﷺ, which is in the Shama'id of Imam al-Tirmidhi, he ate basically barley, was the staple, the grain, barley, sha'ir, which is actually the best of all the grains. It's been proven to actually be the most nutritious of all the grains. Barley, and then he had dates, and dates were eaten in several different stages. So they ate the balah, they ate the rotab, they ate the sukari or the tamr. They had different stages of development, and each one of them has different properties as well, because they actually transform. And they did not drink cow's milk. They drank sheep's milk, goat's milk, camel's milk, and they did make a type of yogurt drink from it, which they would use with a leather, what they call a qirbah, and there's another word for it when they make the yogurt with it, which I can't remember right now. The Bedouin, you know that word? Yeah, they make the yogurt with it and take the butter out, because they do make butter. So they had some butter, zubda, the cream, or the butter, and then he had We know that he liked pumpkin, yaqteen, that he liked cucumber, khiyar al-qitha, that he liked grapes, which they did have at Ta'if, and they used to bring them to Mecca. And there were even some of the karm in Mecca, some of the houses, the Ara'ish had grapevine. And he liked also the melon. So they did have melons and things like that. They had mishmish. They knew about mishmish, which was from Syria. They brought dried apricots. They also knew about teen, which was dried, that they brought from Syria. But those were very expensive, and for the wealthy people. The poor people didn't eat those things. So the diet was very simple. And then meat was something that they actually ate quite rarely. They were not heavy meat eaters. In fact, really, we would say now, in the language of this time, they would be called semi-vegetarian, because they really ate very little meat. The Arabs loved meat, but only the wealthy could afford it, because poor people could not afford meat. Because meat, in those days, you sacrificed when you ate the meat. You couldn't go to the butcher. They didn't have like a butcher where you go and... No. You had the meat and you would sacrifice it yourself, or you would go to somebody's house and sacrifice. And that's usually when they got meat, was when they went as a guest to somebody else's house. That's generally where people got meat. And that's why meat is considered na'im. It's a na'im food. It's an excessive food. And this is why I've heard people tell me, about eating the meat from grocery stores in America. They say, min bab al-darurat. You can't prove that by Sharia, because meat is not from the darurat. It really isn't. Now there's a certain character that the Arabs call qarimun, right? Qarimun is somebody who loves meat, right? Carnivorous, they say in English. They love meat, qarim. And there's a hadith that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu says to a man, why I always seeing you buy meat? And he said, Inni qarimun ya amir al-mu'minin. I'm qarim, I love meat. And Umar said to him that, I am afraid you'll be from those who adhaba tayyibatihim fil hayat ad-dunya. You'll be from those who lose all of their good deeds in this world by taking too much na'im from the dunya. That's what he was afraid. And Umar, during his khilafah, prohibited the eating of meat every day. And this is called taqyid al-mubah, which is permissible for the khalifa to do that, because it's mubah to eat meat every day. And they say Hasan al-Basri كان يأكل الطعام كل يوم وما كنا نقدح في زهده. One of the Salaf said Hasan al-Basri used to eat a small amount of meat every day, and we didn't consider that it affected his status as a zahid, that he was zahid, you see. But during the time of Umar, when people started eating a lot of meat because a lot of wealth was coming from the ghanaim and things, he's made it impermissible for people to eat meat every day. They had to do it every other day. He was worried about that. Now, I find it very interesting that although there is a hadith, and there's some in al-Bukhari, one of them which Aisha, the Prophet ﷺ said, فَضْلُ الثَّرِيدِ عَلَى سَائِرَ الطَّعَامِ كَفَضْلِ عَائِشَ عَلَى سَائِرِ النِّسَاءِ كَفَضْلِ الثَّرِيدِ عَلى سَائِرِ الطَّعَامِ. The preference of Aisha over other women, the preference of that tharid over the rest of food. So that, the Prophet said, is the highest type of food, because it's the most delicious. And there's also a hadith which says, al-lahmu sayyid al-ta'am, that meat is the master of food. It's like the aristocrat of food. Now, despite those hadiths which Imam Malik knew, radiallahu anhu, the two hadiths that he has a chapter called Babul Lahm in his Muwatta. You could look it up, there's a Muwatta here, Babul Lahm, the chapter concerning meat. He only has two hadiths, and both of them are warnings about meat. One of them, both are from Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar radiallahu anhu, who said in one of them, إِيَّاكُمْ وَاللَّحَمْ فَإِنَّ لَهُ ضَرَاوَةٍ كَضَرَاوَةِ الْخَمَرِ. Beware of meat, because it has an addiction like the addiction of wine. And to this day, in Yemen, they call meat khamr al-mu'mineen. the wine of the believers. That's a name that they call in the Hadrami language for meat, khamr al-mu'mineen. Now what happens to people who eat meat consistently is they don't like food that doesn't have meat in it. They lose the taste for it, and they always want meat. Where's the meat? You see, they get used to the flavor of the food having meat, and they become addicted to meat. Now, traditionally in most of the Muslim countries, and like they do in China, meat was a flavoring. They did not eat large pieces of meat. It was literally a flavoring for the food. And you will find, if you ask people that are still alive, from say somebody 70, 80 years old, who grew up in anywhere in the Muslim world, you ask them how much meat they had when they were growing up, and you will be amazed to find that most of them ate very little meat. But because of the modern ability to refrigerate, to raise massive amounts of hormonized beef and graze all of these animals, bulking them up. If you go and see, you know, in America during the time they call Thanksgiving, which everybody eats turkey, they have these turkeys like just enormous, unbelievable. And then right next to them you could see organic turkey. In other words, a turkey that didn't have any hormones and growth, all these growth hormones and chemicals, and it's like about 1/3 the size of this. Now if you also notice, Americans tend to be very big, right? They're big people. Now I grew up vegetarian. Oh, so I'm spilling the beans here. Some background baggage bringing into Islam. But I actually did not eat meat after when I was 12. I stopped eating meat. But if you look at Americans generally, they're actually much bigger than most people. Really, they're giant people. Is it true or not, Sidi Abdullah? Now what you notice, immigrants, when they move to America, suddenly their children, and this is amazing because you see it all over America. You see these Indian who came to America, the father's 5'6", the mother's 5'2", the son's 6 foot. They think it's good protein. In other words, that they didn't have good food when they were in India. That's really what most of them think it is. And they don't realize it just has to do with the hormones in the milk and in the meat. That these are unnatural growth hormones that they're putting in these foods. So wherever American beef has gone, there has been a raise and increase in the height of the people. This has happened in Japan, in the Asian countries like Philippines, right? The houses in the Philippines now, they're all having, because Filipino people are traditionally like 5'4". Now the ideal height for a human being by our physiology is about 5'8". And you will find in the Muslim world that is pretty much the average height of people is around, you know, if you go on Hajj and you're over 6 feet, you find yourself kind of towering over everybody. And then the Malaysians walk by, you know, and they're kind of, you know, like midget people. And they're actually quite normal in relation to, you know, but when you compare them to these people that are actually very large, right? They're very big people. But they're inorganic people. In other words, a lot of what they have is just, it's unnatural, the way that they've acquired it. So, now there's obviously stock as well, because you get into some areas, I mean even in Europe you can find there's areas where there's larger people, I mean that is true. But this is something that's a very interesting phenomenon. Now another thing, there's a researcher in the US that did a study on estrogen, which is a very common hormone that they use in the poultry and in the beef. And estrogen is a female hormone, and he thought that the rise in homosexuality was related to using all these female hormones in the cows and in the chickens and all of these things, that it was creating unnatural tendencies in people, things like this. So there's people taking this very seriously, you know, what people are doing to changing the creation of Allah. And it's all for money. That's the only reason they're doing it. It's not, doesn't make healthier animals. It's simply to make more meat so that you can sell it pound for more money. That's the only reason. There's no other reason. And it's because also Americans want to eat these big giant steaks, right? Now the other thing that's very interesting is the second hadith, which is in the Muwatta, where he sees the man who buys it every day and he says, Akulu mashtarayt, ashtahayt, ashtarayt. Every time you get hungry, you just buy meat. And he said, yes. And he said, it would be better if you just tucked your stomach in a little bit and let other people eat. Now this, the Prophet ﷺ said, لو كان نبي بعدي لكان عمر. If there was a prophet after me, it would have been Umar. Now one of the really interesting things about the age we're living in is that grain, massive amounts of grain are going to the livestock industry to raise cattle, right? Because the British, they're called beef eaters, right? And then they took this beef eating idea to America, because America's Anglo-Saxon, and the beef eaters went around. In fact, the reason they killed all of the buffalo of the Native American Indians, who that was their staple, was simply to create grazing land. They killed millions of buffalo, went out, they used to go out and just shoot them. And they didn't use the meat, they were just wiping them out, one, to starve the Native Americans, but two, to create grazing land for their cattle, the longhorns and these things. And they also wiped out the sheep herders. There were huge battles up in northern America, in the Montana, Utah, and these areas between the sheep ranchers and between the cattle ranchers, and the cattle ranchers defeated them. So beef became the dominant food. Now one of the interesting things is that in the Muslim world, most of the Muslim countries did not eat beef. They ate lamb, which is the traditional meat of the Prophet ﷺ, was lamb. He did not eat beef, although he did sacrifice a cow on the Hajj, and it was for his women. He did not eat beef. And my Muratt al-Hajj told me that he had thought about getting rid of his cows at one time, just because it wasn't an animal of the Prophet, but he decided because Ibrahim a.s. had cows that it was all right. Because Ibrahim ata bi'ijrin samin, he brought a young healthy calf and fed the calf. So there's certainly nothing wrong. There is a hadith that says لحم البقر داء وألبانها شفاء, and that's a sahih hadith, and it's called mushkil with the muhaddithin. The meaning anyway, that the meat of the cow is a disease and its milk is a cure. And now we know it's one of the #1 causes of arteriovascular disease, right? All of the arteries get clogged up. And now they have, like in Pakistan, because people like this ghee and things like this. And by the way, bypass operations are very common amongst upper class Indo-Pakistani peoples. Is true or not true? Very common. Tragic, because if you follow the Sunnah, you would never have a bypass operation. And I'm amazed at people that they say things like, Alhamdulillah, mashallah, the operation went very well, and this and that, and mashallah, qaddar Allah ma sha'an fa'al. You know, and I want to say to them, you know, why you blame things on Allah? Allah says, Kulu wa sharabu wa la tusrifu. Inna Allah la yuhibbul musrifin. Eat and drink, but not to excess. Allah doesn't love those who are excessive. The Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونُهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونُهُمْ ثُمَّ يَظْهَرُ فِيهِمُ السَّمَنُ. The best of my ummah is the first generation, then the second generation, then the third generation, and then they start getting plump. That's a hadith sahih. They start getting plump. So you eat all this food that Allah told you not to do, and then you say, mashallah, I got cardiovascular disease. No, you say, you know, you blame your nafs. It was your own appetite that led to that condition. There's no reason why you should have, I mean, there are people that have certain congenital disorders. That is true. But for most people, it's just simply a matter of bad eating, that their nafs got the better of them and they weren't able to control that. So people really should recognize that the body is literally designed to live 120 years. By Western materialistic scientists, the body is designed to live a very long time. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَعْمَارُ أُمَّتِي مَا بَيْنَ 60 وَ70. My ummah's ages will be between 60 and 70. So the majority of the ummah will die between 60 and 70. That's a sahih hadith, and that's what Allah has determined the ajal of this ummah. Alhamdulillah, the Prophet died at 63. He was in perfect health. When he died of a fever, but they said that his stomach was completely flat, that he had only 17 gray hairs in his beard, that he was very strong, he had the strength of 40 men, And he walked and he was doing jihad until the last, Hamza radiallahu anhu was 55 on the Battle of Badr. And they said, Yawm Badr kana Yawm Hamza. It was Hamza's day because of what he did with the mushrikeen on that day. And Wahshi was hired by Hind because of what he did on Badr. He killed some of the great warriors of Quraysh. He was 55 years old. You look at a 55-year-old now in the Muslim Ummah, and they're all bent over, they've got their abaya and Shaykh Fulan, you know. So the body has certain rights. Inna li jasadika alayka haqqa. Your body has a right over you. And the right of the body is that we eat, we fuel it properly, we exercise it properly, we give it enough sleep that it needs. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali says the maximum amount of sleep that you should give your body, the maximum amount is 8 hours. That's the maximum. Some people need a lot of sleep. If you need a lot of sleep, that is the maximum. You should never go more than 8 hours. And it actually becomes negative sleep. Now, just to talk a little bit about sleep, because sleep is nourishment. It is literally food for the ruh. The body is fed by proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. But the ruh is fed by dhikr and by noam, by remembrance of Allah and by sleep. And that's why the more dhikr you do, the less sleep you need. People that do deep dhikr actually sleep less than people that don't. This is a fact. And even, interestingly enough, people that do forms of non-Islamic people that do forms of meditation where they've shown that they go into theta wave states in their brain, they also need less sleep. So it's not simply an Islamic phenomenon. You can find this in other traditions, that people that do learn how to concentrate or meditate at a deep level don't have to sleep as much as other people. So there's something to be said for that, just from that perspective. Now, the nature of sleep is, if you sleep before 12, and I'm using 12 midnight, not the number 12 like on the clock, but before midnight, if you look, if Fajr's at 4 and Maghrib's at 8, then 12 would be half night, midnight, right? But if Fajr's at 3 and Maghrib's at 8, then it would be 11 o'clock. The sleep after Isha, before midnight, is worth twice of sleep after. All right? So if you sleep 1 hour between, say now you go to bed at 10:30 and you sleep till 12, that's the equivalent of 3 hours sleep. It's only an hour and a half, but because that sleep is before the half night, it's the equivalent of 3 hours. Right? So people, and this is why the sunnah of the Prophet was to go to bed immediately after Isha. And in this, I'm not making this up. This isn't Hamza's theories or something like that. I mean, this is actually from Tib. And it's confirmed by if you do it. So, now the other thing is, if you sleep after Fajr, before Shuruq, it's negative sleep. So if you sleep an hour, it's as if you were deprived of 2 hours of sleep. All right, you won't get rest from it. It's negative sleep. If you sleep after Asr, before Maghrib, or before Isha, it's negative sleep. All of that is negative sleep. It's as if you didn't sleep. You actually lose sleep. If you sleep after the Dhuhr prayer, before Asr, it's positive sleep. And it's worth twice. So if you sleep 1 hour between 1 and 2 o'clock, say you pray the Dhuhr at 1, if you go to sleep at 1:30, get up at 2:30, it's as if you've had 2 hours of sleep in terms of the rejuvenation of the body, rejuvenation. All right? So you following this? Now, if you sleep also after Asr, there's a hadith that Imam Suyuti relate in the Tibb al-Nabawi, and I don't think it's sound, but he related in there, and it said, whoever sleeps after Asr and wakes up mad, فَلَا يَلُومَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ, let him only blame himself. مَنْ نَامَ بَعْدَ الْعَصْرِ وَاسْتَيْقَظَ مَجْنُونًا فَلَا يَلُومَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. He should only blame himself. So some sheikh was telling that in the masjid, and some crazy guy got up and said, no, that can't be right. I always sleep after Asr. So that's basically the benefit, of the sleep that we should. And the Prophet ﷺ used to sleep after dhuhr, and he said, "Qilu fi inna shayateen la yaqilun." Take qaylula, which is that afternoon sleep, because shayateen don't take qaylula. So it's a good sleep to do, and it's also isti'ana ala qiyam al-layl. It helps people get up at night to do the night prayers. Because if you're up all day from after Fajr all the way up to Isha, you're exhausted and you're going to sleep very heavily, and you won't have any rest. And also they've done studies, these are like medical studies that the universities have done in the States, and these have been published in medical journals, that Mediterranean people who have qayluda, like Southern Spanish, Italians, that's where the studies were done. They don't bother to do them on the Muslims. And in Greece, those people had lower blood pressures, lower heart attack rates, less stress rates. They were healthier people, right? And they felt that there was a direct correlation between afternoon naps, and they actually based it on stress levels rising throughout the day, that when you stop after dhuhr and go to sleep, that it literally bring you back to a starting point that you had in the morning. So you literally get a deep rejuvenation that takes place in that type of sleep. So, I mean, basically what, the point of this is that I think none of us should forget the responsibility that we have just to keep ourselves healthy. It's really important. Now, sickness is not a bad thing, because it's tahara for this ummah. And they say, La khayra fi jasadin idha lam yamrad. There's no good in a body that doesn't get sick. That it's a purification, and the Prophet ﷺ got sick. We know that. He didn't have any foul illnesses, which is not permissible for the prophets, right? A marad yaqtahu, some disease. But they can get the simple illnesses, coughs, colds, fevers, things like that. They can get these things. Generally, you will get sick when your immune system goes down. The immune system goes down when you're not giving the body its haqq. If you eat, for instance, sugar, if you're eating over 40 grams of sugar a day, they know very clearly in Western physiology that your white blood cell count goes down quite radically. So people that are constantly taking sugar are in an immunocompromised state. And this is why your sugar intake should be actually very slight. You shouldn't take a lot of sugar. It's actually quite harmful if you do. I think personally, drinking all of these sugared drinks is really bad for your health. People that drink Pepsi and Coke, first of all, I would not want to support those corporations. That's the first thing, because they really are al-mufsidun fil ard. And second of all, it's totally unbeneficial, and it's actually doing worse. There's no benefit in it. You're actually harming yourself. If you eat a meal and you drink water, there is an effect on the digestive system. That's why the sunnah was not to drink with meals. The Prophet did not drink with meals, and it's in al-Bajuri mentions this. If you drink sugar, not water, if you drink sugared water with a meal, then you create a fermentation that takes place inside, especially if you've eaten carbohydrates and bread, meat. Because what happens is your stomach, actually there's two stomachs. You have a cardiac stomach, pyloric and cardiac. The cardiac stomach is the higher stomach, right? And initially when you eat something, it will stop at that point for a period of time, and the tylonin and the other enzymes that come from the saliva, if you chewed your food well, will begin to digest the food. When it moves down into the pyloric stomach, what happens is whatever enzymes were not there in the food then will be released into the food. When you take water with that, you dilute the enzymatic power of those, so the digestion is weakened, right? And it also puts out the fire of digestion, because digestion is heat and it needs heat. If you drink cold fluids, that's why it's better to drink a warm fluid, actually, than a cold fluid. It's actually deleterious to your digestion to drink cold with your meals, right? Because you're actually putting out the fire of the digestion. And the other thing is the when you get into the element theory, which is, it's an Islamic theory. It's not, even though the Greeks had it, the Prophet ﷺ clearly articulates it in several hadiths. And Al-Bajuri, on his commentary on the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi, in the hadith about the eating the dates and eating the cucumber with it, the Prophet said, هَذَا يُبَرِّدُ هَذَا. The cucumber cools the heat of the date. And that's based on the four element theory, because basically they divide foods into hot, dry, cold, wet. That's, every food can be classified. So dates are hot and dry. They're hot and drying foods. And cucumbers are cold and wet. And so they actually counter, if you eat too much of a hot and dry food, then the body creates too much heat, and it'll create an imbalance in the body. If you eat too much cold and wet foods, then that will also create an imbalance. And cold and wet is, although it just depends, some's worse than others, it depends. But generally, if you want a good memory, you should tend to eat more hot and dry foods, because people that are hot and dry have better memories than people that are cold and wet. Phlegmatic people, what they used to call phlegmatic people in the West, people that are heavy set, produce a lot of mucus, and these are cold and wet people. They tend to be less acute, less sharp than the more hot and dry type. Now there is a natural drying out as you get older. The more cold and wet you are, the more sleep you need. The more hot and dry you are, the less sleep you need. So what happens is babies sleep all day long, and they're very wet, and they're actually wet and hot, but they sleep a lot because of the wetness. As they get older, they get colder and drier. So by the time you get to old age, you're actually quite dry and getting cold, because the vital heat's being extinguished. And this is why old people actually, in the West, they call it insomnia. Muslims don't have insomnia because they just take it as a sign they should be praying, right? But in the West, older people get very upset about not being able to sleep. For a Muslim, it's kind of like you're getting on, you know, you're going to die tomorrow or the next day or the day after, so you better take advantage of your night, right? Seriously. I mean, in traditional Muslim societies, an old person that didn't get up and do tahajjud, and it was a fool, right? So people that have insomnia in old age, they should really, what they're supposed to be doing is worshiping, and they don't know that. So food can be related to those things, and there should be a balance of your foods. But I think what the basic thing is, food should be reasonably simple, right? It should not be, you shouldn't eat a whole bunch of different things, and certainly don't eat more than one meat. I mean, that's actually quite disgusting, to have like chicken, beef, lamb at the same setting. I mean, it's very extravagant to do that. Now, Sahad al-Tusturi was asked once about people. He said, what do you say about a person that eats once a day? And he said, Akulul Anbiya, that's the way the prophets eat. And he said, what about somebody that eats twice a day? And he said, Akulul Salihin. And he said, what do you say about somebody who eats 3 times a day? And he said, Ibna lahu ma'lafa. Just build him a stable, right, where he can graze all day long. Now, I think that if you eat reasonable amounts, there's nothing wrong with having a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, if you're eating reasonable amounts. If you're getting extravagant, you know, breakfast should be, it's better to do some work before it, you know, get the body moving, but it should be, you know, reasonable meal, and then the lunch should be the heavier meal. And then that's why you're supposed to sleep after lunch. The Arabs, they say, تَغَذَّى تَمَدَّى تَعَشَّى تَمَشَّى. Eat lunch, go to sleep, eat dinner, take a walk. So lunch should be the heaviest meal of the day. And then dinner should be a light meal. And the Prophet said, eat dinner even if it's just a handful of dates. And he also said about suhoor, تَسَحَّرُوا فَإِنَّ فِي السُّحُورِ barakah. Take the suhoor because there's barakah in suhoor. It's a barakah time to eat it. And when there's barakah, that means that you don't need a lot to sustain yourself throughout the day. So there are times where things have more barakah, like fruit has more barakah in the morning than it does in the evening. It's better to eat fruit in the morning than it is in the evening. And Imam Asyuti mentions that in the morning, fruit is gold, at lunch it's silver, and in the evening it's lead. Right? So the benefit of it decreases through the day. And because fruit is a spring food, and the time of the day that relates to spring is the early morning. Right? And then the other thing is that it's better to roast in the winter to boil in the summer. Right? Roasting meat in the winter, boiling it in the summer, because roasting infuses it with heat, which you need in the winter, and boiling it defuses the heat, because you need less heat in the summer. You don't want to get too hot. And that's why you should eat less meat in the summertime than you do in the winter. Winter is a better time to eat meat, because it's cold, and it's a yang food, it's a strong, energetic food. And meat will give you energy, there's no doubt. It gives you an energy, but you'll pay a price for it if you do it constantly. It becomes addictive, just like wine is a stimulant initially, and then it becomes a depressant. Meat is like that. It's a stimulant initially, but it'll eventually wear your body down until the body actually goes into disarray. So these are just some general guidelines about this matter, and I really think Muslims have become really inattentive to these aspects of the Sunnah, because food is definitely a very important thing. The Prophet ﷺ came to teach us how to eat as well. He definitely came to teach us how to eat. And I think if you want to know what to eat, the best thing is to traditionally look at what your people ate, your ethnic group ate in their traditional food, not modern diet, but what they ate traditionally, and that will usually be the best genetic food for you. In terms of what you need to eat. When you're in a country like England, it's better to eat more cooked foods, hot foods, heating foods, than it is to eat raw and cold foods. When you're in hotter climates, you eat more raw food, because the body needs less innate heat. So here it's a damp and cold country. You need more hot and dry foods. If you go to a tropical country, you need more drying, cooling foods. If you're in a middle country, you need more balanced foods. So it just depends on where you are geographically. And these are all real concerns. I mean, they're not. There's a very good book by Elgin Haas called Eating Through the Seasons. And he gives very good guidelines based on traditional Chinese medicine on what types of foods you should eat throughout the year, because they change, and the Chinese understand this. And the Chinese, by Western studies, have shown to have actually the healthiest diets. They have